So dear colleagues, friends, ICOM members and non-ICOM members, welcome to Closing the Pandemic Final Conference, which I'm happy to host online today. I would like to thank you for attending this conference. I will be the moderator of this international conference, and there will be simultaneous translation in the 3 official languages of ICOM, French, English, and Spanish. So please choose your channel of translation and you can choose your preferred language. For the question and answer, you have a box where you can put your questions and we will keep them for the end of the session. I would like to thank the translators here, and some of them present today were also simultaneously translating Closing the Pandemic online workshops earlier this year. I'm very grateful to the speakers who generously accepted to contribute to this conference panel, which will be closing the project before the launch of the virtual exhibition of COVID-19 face mask collected around the world, scheduled to open in the coming weeks. Closing the Pandemic, a virtual exhibition of COVID-19 face mask from around the world is the title. I want to acknowledge my colleagues from the partner institutions worldwide, 15 in total, who contributed to this virtual exhibition. The Asian Civilizations Museum, the British Museum, the Budapest History Museum, Kissel Museum, Central Museum in Utrecht, the MUSEM, the Museum for the Mediterranean Civilizations, the Musée Théodore Monod d'Art Africain in Dakar, Senegal, Museo Cordillera in the Philippines, the Museo del Diseño de Barcelona, the Museum at the Fashion Institute of Technology in New York, the Museum of New Zealand Te Papa Tongarewa, the National Museum Scotland, the Rose Textile and Fashion Archive in Israel, the Royal Ontario Museum, the Victoria and Albert Museum, and the Westminster Menswear Archive. I would also like to acknowledge the 2 interns, Roman and Julia, who helped to coordinate the exhibition and the project. It has been wonderful time working with you all. I'm honored to be able to convene from distance a conference with linguists, historians, curators, and the museum's partners for the forthcoming virtual exhibition to discuss protective face masks, global pandemics, museums' challenges of collects and displays through time and space. I would also like to thank Volker Hermes, artist plasticien, who generously offered his works of art, beautiful and amazing photo collage inspired and made from early modern portraits to illustrate the project. How did Closing the Pandemic emerge from the COVID-19 period? In the fall 2020, ICOM made a call for a project on the topic of solidarity, which targeted museums' resilience in time of COVID. ICOM Costume applied for a grant funded by ICOM Sarek for 2021 with the project Closing the Pandemic, Resiliency, Community and Unity expressed through an international collaboration of the COVID-19 face mask project. Along with ICOM Costume, ICOM CC, International Committee for Conservation, ICME, the International Committee for the Museums and Collections of Ethnography, and the National Committee ICOM Canada accepted to collaborate to this project. By bringing together ICOM international and national committees, this project has developed and succeeded in creating a virtual exhibition considering all aspects of the art, practice and culture of face masks during the COVID-19 pandemic. This project has also been organizing online workshops during 2021 and a repository of museums' initiatives and projects addressing the pandemic in a WeMap accessible on the ICOM Costume mini site and under the project menu. If we may have an illustration here. Thank you. A complementary research blog, we have also an image. A complementary research blog presents a selection of masks and reports on their making. This research and digital exhibition project aim to document and contextualize the use of face masks during the coronavirus pandemic of 2020-21. Face masks have become the iconic object and symbol of the pandemic, representing humanity's resilience, community, and unity during this global tragedy. The project connects international museums and curators working on this topic and disseminates and shares their collections virtually to a global public. The stories of COVID-19 will be recorded in all the world's history books. How to record the traces of this pandemic, how to conserve the materiality of this global pandemic, how to document the human history in real time. How is this human crisis challenging museums professionals? In a similar way, this project intends to preserve and explore the iconic object of this challenging pandemic since its very beginnings, the face mask. These face masks are implicated in a wide range of facets of society, from health, fashion, art and crafts to history, identity, and sustainability. It is important for museums and the public to have a broader understanding of textile and dress collecting relating to the pandemic. In parallel to medical scientists, museum curators have been researching and working throughout the pandemic to study, understand, and document the social dimensions of the pandemic. Around the world, many museums since April 2020 have begun to collect face masks and other dress items, chronicling this period of time and exploring their meanings for the people who make and wear them. The ICOM Costume Committee is spearheading this initiative and is seeking to highlight and bring together the international efforts to document this moment in time through a joint virtual repository as a virtual exhibition and an international conference. Please, we have an image for that too. The Ppe Mask, this facial protection, is a quite fragile material barrier against the virus. Whether we like it or not, we will continue to cover our face as the virus is still circulating. Made of almost any material available, this small piece of fabric, textile, paper, leather, whatever it is made of, encapsulates our understanding and interpretation of the disease and how we intend to demonstrate human resilience. My wish for now is that you shall see the mask through the almost unlimited variations mask makers can offer to our eyes, a very unique material expression of COVID-19 in the many ways it is explored in the project Closing the Pandemic.
Merci beaucoup Corinne, et tous mes compliments pour ce très beau projet et mon honneur de pouvoir contribuer à cette recherche et en pensant justement qu'on a toute une perspective internationale passionnante. Alors, puisque parler de tout ce qui a été mis en marche au cours de la crise sanitaire et de la pandémie est un sujet très vaste. Alors, je me suis concentrée, à partir surtout de la langue anglaise. Alors, en tant que bassin en tant que source générale, pour comprendre de tous côtés. Alors, que ce soit les masques, que ce soit les vêtements de la crise pandémique, alors comment est-ce qu'on a habillé cette crise du point de vue linguistique? Et donc, alors, j'espère ne pas décevoir en traversant des méthodes d'analyse linguistique, des ressources qui pourraient peut-être intéresser les différents besoins des institutions qui sont ici présentes. Il faut dire que donc le tout début, moi je vous renverrai par exemple à tout le travail qui a été fait à l'intérieur de l'Oxford Corpus et donc de l'Oxford English Dictionary. non pas parce qu'on pourrait évidemment suivre la tradition française, italienne, espagnole, etc. Mais de ce point de vue-là, il faut que, disons, je souligne que dans toute langue européenne, je dirige un réseau qui s'appelle Réalitaire, le réseau de terminologie de langue romane. Il y a eu des recherches et des enquêtes. Donc, moi, je ne peux que renvoyer dans toutes les langues aux équipes qui se sont occupées du français, de l'italien, de l'espagnol, du portugais, du roumain, etc. Alors, pour voir quelle a été la résonance et quel a été l'intérêt. Alors, je suis partie de l'anglais. Alors, parce que finalement, c'est en anglais que certains mots ont commencé leur diffusion internationale en raison surtout de la question des sources écrites et orales. Et alors, les téléjournaux, les réseaux sociaux, les briefings des gouvernements avec les adaptations, alors évidemment, qui ont provoqué quelquefois tout simplement des reprises de sens des mots qui existaient déjà. D'autres fois, alors par contre, ce sont, disons, cela a été disons, des mots nouveaux qui ont été lancés. Alors là, vous voyez, sous ce masque de mots, alors vous récupérez alors tous les mots qui nous ont angoissés juste, disons, qui ont été lancés juste au début, et donc février-mars 2020. Dans alors, ces mots avec lesquels, disons, on est devenu si familier, alors, les revoilà, par contre, parmi les top 20, alors, qui ont été utilisés, alors, autour de coronavirus dans le Oxford Corpus, considérant de janvier au mois de mars 2020. Alors, et là, c'est donc la perspective lexicographique. Donc, considérez, alors, outbreak, and novel, pandemic, spread, COVID-19. Donc, vous voyez que ça arrive un peu plus loin. Et donc, le fait des mots qui commencent à être partagés, bon, énormément dans les journaux, à la télévision, et voilà, dans les nouvelles qui se répandaient. Alors, vous voyez très bien qu'il n'y a pas tellement de mots hyper spécialisés. Alors, ce sont des mots alors par lesquels on englobait une nouvelle maladie comme si c'était, disons, avec la conscience. En Italie peut-être avant, et moi je suis d'ailleurs de la ville Brescia, côté de Bergame, qui ont été les deux premières villes vraiment très atteintes par tout ça. Et franchement, on n'en pensait même pas aux mots. Je change de point de vue. Alors, regardez, alors disons dans ce commentaire, alors ce que le Merriam-Webster a nommé le mot de l'année, tristement connu, hein, et le pandémique. Alors, et après, évidemment, il y a d'autres mots, alors qui commencent à être répandus, perçus à l'intérieur dans la sensibilité lexicographique. Alors, je renvoie donc à toutes les traditions lexicographiques, disons des langues naturelles, parce que vous allez retrouver la même perception. Je pense en italien, les remarques faites par Accademia della Crusca, Treccani. Alors, je fais référence aux conférences de Bernard Cerchilidi, disons, qui a fait le point sur les nouveautés lexicales du français, notamment le mot de confinement. Alors que dans d'autres pays, l'Italie par exemple, c'était lockdown qui a tracé concrètement la première partie de confinement, c'est-à-dire le mois de mars, avril, mai 2020. Mais encore, alors, nous pouvons considérer qu'il y a eu d'autres mots qui se sont répandus, si on assume une perspective psychologique, sinon psychiatrique. Et alors, voilà, disons, ces nuages de mots, alors, qui ont été renvoyés. Alors évidemment, des mots qui étaient là, hein, qui sont là, mais qui ont fait, disons, qui ont eu leur pic au moment de la pandémie. Alors tout cela pour dire que il faut photographier, si on veut photographier la réalité linguistique, il faut la regarder de plusieurs côtés pour reconstituer ce que j'appellerais une sorte de paysage lexical, sémantique autour de la pandémie. On peut s'arrêter sur quelques mots. Alors, considérer de toute manière que ce sont des mots qui ont été relancés, mais qui existaient déjà. Self-isolation, auto-isolement. Bon, c'était en anglais tracé depuis 1834. Self-isolating, 1841. Alors, donc, quelle est la nouveauté? Alors, la nouveauté, c'est la nouvelle terminologisation qu'on donne à des mots qui étaient là, qui ont représenté quelquefois des scènes de notre histoire, quelquefois des mots militaires aussi. Le plus nouveau dans la collection, le plus récent, c'est l'infodémie. Alors, l'infodémie, infodémique, alors pour décrire la prolifération de nouvelles autour du coronavirus. Encore le fait de trouver au premier moment un refuge, ou encore la distanciation sociale. Alors, et à la fin, on ne comprenait pas pourquoi social et non pas physique. Et alors, quelquefois, ça a été la distance physique, en fait, entre les personnes, mais quelquefois les langues romanes ont calqué distanciation sociale, distanziamento sociale. Alors, franchement, c'est un mot qui nous disait pas grand-chose au moment du début de la crise. La manière de se saluer qui se modifie et on a une certaine hésitation pour définir cette manière de saluer, elbow bump. Alors parce que cela devient coude à coude concrètement. Il y a même un traducteur qui avait proposé non pas l'accolade mais la décollade, mais ça n'a pas marché. Donc ça reste, moi je crois quelquefois que les hésitations ou le fait qu'on va acquérir un emprunt d'une autre langue, c'est aussi le moment où la langue se demande si vraiment elle doit faire entrer de manière stable le mot dans sa langue. Et je crois à cette perspective vraiment parce que je pense ce qui s'est passé en italien avec la première phase de confinement. On l'appelait en italien lockdown et pas question de dire chiusura, confinamento. À ce moment-là, on l'a jamais dit. On a dit lockdown. Ce qui fait qu'après, quand on a dû reconfiner, alors l'italien, alors là, oui, il a sorti chiusura, il a sorti confinamento. Et j'espère que ça se produira pas parce que finalement, en Italie, on est assez tranquille, relativement tranquille, mais on parle d'éventuelles chiusure. Donc alors, la langue se rétablit, se remet à l'intérieur de ses possibilités. L'emprunt, quelquefois, signale le danger. Alors, et fini le danger, c'est, disons, le fleuve tranquille qui devrait revenir, ce qu'on souhaite. On pourrait vraiment rester à l'intérieur de toute la gamme qui a concerné notre vie sociale et donc considérons le télétravail. Alors, avec la création en italien d'un faux anglicisme qui est le smart working, ça n'existe pas, mais en italien, on s'obstine de dire ça au lieu de dire lavoro agile ou lavoro a distanza. Donc, travail à distance, télétravail. Mais revenons maintenant au masque. Alors, le masque, c'est un mot mondial, alors qui s'est répandu partout, mais qui avait déjà une globalisation auparavant, une mondialisation de l'italien maschera. C'est en anglais arrivé par le français. L'origine est du latin médiéval, masca, et ça a donné d'ailleurs une sorte de doublet en anglais, comme quoi on a aussi mèche qui a la même origine. Et cela remplaçait donc le fait d'avoir un visier, donc d'avoir une protection au visage, évidemment pour le côté surtout militaire. L'origine véritable devrait être de l'arabe mascara, via la Méditerranée, et donc on le retrouve dans le provençal, on le retrouve dans le catalan, et c'est ce besoin alors qui a associé la masque, disons pour le théâtre, la masque pour le carnaval. Disons que ce qui a été choquant dans l'utilisation du masque, c'est que c'est le besoin médical qui nous a apporté l'utilisation du mot a son ampleur. Un petit moment, passons toujours par le coronavirus. Je rappelle que c'est un mot qui a été vraiment mâché en anglais. Alors, parce que c'est là où on utilise l'abréviation corona, et quelquefois c'est encore plus abrégé, Rona, trending, disons, la mode, on le retrouve en Australie et aux États-Unis. Le masque, donc un objet de plaisir qui devient un objet d'angoisse. Un objet, disons, vraiment recherché et qui devient une habitude. Une habitude, je disais, relancée par le domaine médical. Et alors, il y a les typologies de masques. Masque, disons, c'est le nom inéliminable, il n'y a pas de synonyme possible. Alors, qui a une série d'adjectifs à côté. Alors, suivant si c'est le masque pour ceux qui travaillent dans le milieu sanitaire. Et alors, c'est le masque médical. Et alors, c'est le masque avec les sigles qui le caractérisent. On arrive à voir disons, the transport medical mask, face shield. Donc, les types de masques, la chirurgie, alors tout ce qui était dans le secret de l'hôpital, de la salle chirurgicale, ressort presque dans la rue parce qu'il y a eu vraiment des moments où on a vu de tout. Mais puisque il y a l'emploi pour disons, pour le besoin non médical, alors le masque devient le masque de tissu, le masque avec les filtres, le masque transparent, le masque en papier, le masque qui se déclinera dans toutes les formes et dans tous les sujets. Alors, comme si c'était la petite partie filmique, comme l'a été le gilet quelquefois dans le temps, ou l'a été disons, ça peut être la cravate ou un ruban. Voilà, donc le masque, on cherche au moins à rendre plus agréable, plus acceptable un objet qui est là de toute manière pour marquer le problème, la difficulté, sinon la maladie. Ça devient presque un casse-tête de masque par rapport à l'usage de l'utilisateur, disons de l'usager commun. Est-ce que le masque en tissu fait maison est possible? Est-ce que on peut imaginer un masque industriel, artisanal? Donc, les variétés de masques que vous retrouvez là correspondent à la prolifération des types de masques, mais qui restent des masques de protection, à la limite codés UNS 1, UNS 2, usage non sanitaire, mais toujours normés, disons, pour la vente aux citoyens par des normes AFNOR, pour la France par les normes, disons, de toutes les différenciations dans tous les pays. C'est le masque alternatif, c'est le masque grand public. Ça peut être aussi le masque assorti à la garde-robe, le masque lavable, toujours à l'opposé avec le masque chirurgical, avec les FFP1, FFP2, FFP3. Du point de vue terminologique, ce sera très intéressant de contribuer alors au classement dans les langues différentes. Ce que je remarque déjà, c'est qu'il n'y a pas nécessairement, puisqu'il s'agit quelquefois de produits commerciaux, les mêmes équivalents à l'intérieur de toutes les langues. Mais vous avez quand même, évidemment, les mêmes catégories. Donc, les catégories que je viens de représenter là, ce sont les catégories applicables à n'importe quelle langue parce que c'est la situation qui s'est produite de partout. Considérons aussi que les masques, là j'ai pris la description du type des masques et respirateurs canadiens. Alors, parce qu'il y a aussi toutes les sources d'accompagnement et d'explication dans la communication institutionnelle aux citoyens. je passe rapidement sur le fait que notre élément pour rétablir le paysage autour des masques, c'est toutes les adjectifs, les types de verbes, les mots qui ont été relancés à cette période. Donc, je crois que on peut pas déplacer et détacher les masques de toute cette partie de discours. Donc, j'imagine justement de pouvoir imaginer ces masques, des masques qui ont toujours apporté le drame et là, surtout, où disons, la maladie a été, le virus a touché davantage les populations. Donc, j'imaginerais effectivement la reconstruction de tout ce paysage. Les pics, par exemple, lorsqu'on a parlé toujours des pics d'alerte, ou bien l'auto-quarantaine, sinon quatorzaine, disons, par rapport au fait que le français avait déjà cette mesure de jours, et donc il n'a fait que la rétablir par rapport à une utilisation qui était déjà là. Ce qui est étonnant, c'est que dans cette période, là, le nombre vraiment de mots nouveaux créés n'est pas aussi nombreux que ça. C'est tout simplement un déplacement de domaine, du domaine médical au domaine grand public et de la réactivation avec le sens appliqué au virus, à la crise sanitaire, qui a été relancé. Mais évidemment, tout ce qui est vêtements, voilà, c'est, disons, le symbole, c'est bien le masque. Mais qu'est-ce qu'il est arrivé aux vêtements, au secteur de la mode et de l'habillement dans cette première période, donc 2020 et 2021, parce que maintenant on est déjà dans un moment de sortie. The Guardian a écrit en avril 2021, The sweatpant has supplanted the blue jean in the pants-wearing American imagination. Et alors, donc, c'est quelque chose qui m'étonne du point de vue de l'histoire du costume, parce que si je pense au pantalon du survêtement, alors ça me fait penser aussi dans le survêtement à toute l'histoire qu'a traînée au cours du XXe siècle par rapport à l'histoire de la salopette, une histoire qui commence déjà au XIXe, mais qui est réactivée au XXe siècle. En italien, ça devient la tuta di Michaeles, un peintre dessinateur qui a travaillé avec Madeleine Vionnet et qui avait lancé avec ce nom italien de tuta parce que c'était la femme en T. Alors, et pour lui, c'était la manière d'habiller hommes, femmes, de partout. Il travaille pour Madeleine Vionnet, mais pas question de faire passer le mot italien. Le mot italien reste en Italie avec une signification populaire. Donc, c'est le survêtement, en fait, ou le bleu de travail. Alors que c'est salopette, alors qui désigne en français ce type d'habillement. La salopette prend des lettres de noblesse et elle sera relancée par Yves Saint Laurent avec le nom anglais de jumpsuit. Et donc, nous avons maintenant ces trois mots auxquels s'ajoute celui de, alors, survêtement, qui n'a pas la même forme, mais qui peut se contaminer à l'intérieur de cette famille de mots par rapport aux vêtements. Pendant le fait les mots sont revenus, mais il y a aussi eu la mode et les vêtements qui reviennent. Et donc, la seconde main, le vintage, mais la seconde main qui revient. Et ce sera d'ailleurs les sujets qui accompagneront la crise vestimentaire pendant la crise sanitaire. Ça n'a pas été une crise, ça a été une grande réflexion par rapport aussi à toutes les mentions de tout ce qui doit être éthique, durable et propre, clean, green, etc. Donc, pour conclure, je crois qu'on pourrait photographier disons, par ces mots que j'ai continué de focaliser en anglais. Alors, ce sont les mots qui accompagneraient, donc, à mon avis, les masques. Donc, le lodging, les chaussons, ou quelquefois dans des variétés, hein, des bottes fourrées, chaussettes cocooning, c'est aussi, disons, l'ensemble de tout ce qu'on a vu pendant, disons, en même temps que les masques. Et puis, l'activewear, donc les vêtements de sport, les masques, les sneakers ou baskets, c'était déjà, alors si vous considérez, rien n'est nouveau, mais c'est le symbole que tous ces éléments vestimentaires ont apporté. Peut-être la grande nouveauté, c'était les pyjamas de jour. Alors, parce que rien que Jennifer Aniston qui se présente dans une soirée en pyjama de jour, alors donne cette sorte de confortable en continuité et même dans la dimension du luxe. Tie-dyed fabrics, ça a été peut-être, on l'a vu moins en Italie, je dois dire franchement, mais c'est très caractérisé dans le monde anglo-américain. Et puis, globalement, le fait qu'étant en Zoom, alors on s'habille surtout le top. Et voilà, alors donc le fait des manches bouffantes, par exemple, qui sont revenues, alors tout ce qui a un peu peuplé l'écran, à part les couleurs aussi, par les formes. Voilà, c'est, disons, c'est mon voyage à l'intérieur d'un espace lexical qui est vraiment énorme. Je crois que de toute cette expérience, on retirera la réflexion portée du côté de l'habillement sur la révision du rythme effréné, et donc le mot de fast fashion est derrière et avant la crise. C'est le mot de slow fashion qui était déjà là, mais qui devient en français la mode durable. Et tout ce qui peut être durable. Tout cela accompagné par la numérisation, le passage au numérique des grands événements par moment, alterné à la distance, mais la présence aussi du numérique, et l'idée de la responsabilité et de l'inclusivité. Donc alors, je pense que tous ces éléments sont vraiment recueillis derrière le grand masque de l'habillement de la crise sanitaire. Merci beaucoup.
I'm an historian of Renaissance Italy and plague. So what I hope to do in this talk, which is, in a sense, is to provide the longue durée to the rest of the conference and the concentration in particular on COVID. Now, many are familiar with the image of the plague doctor popularized by the Venetian carnival. His personal protection equipment includes his famous beak containing herbs and spices to filter and purify the air. A glass lens covers his eyes and a leather mask protects his face, all designed to prevent the inhalation or absorption of the corrupt vapors of plague. In the Renaissance period, pestilence and plague were seen in terms of infected air rather than rats and fleas. Corrupt air, the cause and vehicle for the transmission of plague, was believed to be a poisonous substance generated by putrefaction of matter from bogs to insanitary conditions in cities. Thus, when individuals inhaled malaria, it corrupted their bodily humors, and plague was created within their systems and spread through exhalation. Now, it's for this reason that clothes or cloth were targeted as the repositories of plague, because it was believed that the sticky nature of the seeds of contagion were attracted to cloth, and that the disease was stuck to unimpregnated clothes. This explains the series of laws and decrees which were passed across Europe to prohibit the sale of second-hand clothes, and the severity with which people were punished who were caught stealing clothes from the sick and dead. These are themes which will underlay my presentation today. My aim is twofold. First of all, to examine the impact of the strategies taken by public health authorities on the population of one of the largest cities in early modern Europe, Florence, during a major plague epidemic, and secondly, to analyze the reactions of the inhabitants to what they perceived as draconian measures to curb their freedoms. These are themes familiar from our own epidemic of COVID-19, and indeed many recent official measures parallel those taken during the Renaissance. Le lockdown, or lockdown of cities, confining infected people and their contact to their homes, the establishment of large quarantine centres or lazzaretti for the isolation and treatment of the sick and dying. What is less well known in detail for early modern Europe is exactly what was the impact on people at the lower level of society, and furthermore, what were their strategies, both legal and illegal, they adopted to cope with living during an emergency caused by an epidemic. The basis of this analysis will be a large collection of trials of over 560 of those who were prosecuted in early modern Florence during the plague of 1630-31 for breaking public health measures, a theme which underlay my recent book. I will argue that behind the rhetoric of official and medical pronouncements, there lay greater compassion for the poorer members of society, whether reflected in the attitudes of members of fraternities and religious orders, or even in court records. The latter show a surprisingly humane approach to those breaking plague regulations, with a remarkable number of people simply arrested and released without further punishments. First, though, a few words about official strategies. The measures taken by the Florentine health authorities under the control of the Magistrato di Sanità can be divided into two main strands. The first were preventative, which included conducting a survey of the sanitary conditions within the city, imposing cordons sanitaires along the boundaries of the Tuscan state, the close control of the entry and exit of people through city gates, and the regulation of markets and the sale of food and drink. These measures were not as effective as the authorities had hoped, and the plague epidemic broke out in August 1630 and lasted over the course of 1 year, killing roughly 12% of the population of 75,000, although this was considerably less than other parts of northern and central Italy. Now, once it was recognized that plague was present in the city, additional proactive measures were taken to mitigate its effects. These included the identification by medical personnel of those sick from plague, the burial of the dead in plague pits, the transport of the sick outside the city walls to massive isolation hospitals or lazzaretti, the locking up of their contacts, the sospetti, in their own homes, or in some cases, their removal to quarantine centres. Some of these things are quite familiar from our recent epidemic of COVID, which of course is still continuing. The lay religious confraternity of the Misericordia was central to this operation, for it was responsible for the transport of the sick and supervision of gravediggers to bury the dead. And so here's just a quick image of the lazzaretti and quarantine centres which were established around the centre, around the city of Florence, and also a picture of the major quarantine centre, which is the famous Benedictine monastery of San Miniato al Monte. Now, many of these measures are shown or hinted at in Luigi Baccio del Bianco's remarkable picture of plague in Florence in 1631. The scene is instantly recognizable with the Florentine cathedral in the background, with its unfinished facade, Giotto's campanile in the center, and behind and above the famous dome by Filippo Brunelleschi, capped by the golden sphere glinting in the sunshine. The picture reflects a wide range of activities in front of and to the right of the cathedral facade. These areas are full of figures, some of whom appear to be fearfully standing well apart, while others take part in scenes, reflecting both their professional roles and the personal reactions to the plague. It also shows how people were dressed during the plague. One of the main aims of the picture is to demonstrate the charitable work of the Fraternity of the Misericordia. The confraternity headquarters are shown on the right-hand side, the large building decorated with frescoes by Bernardo Porchetti depicting the 7 works of mercy, which underlay their charitable mission. Underneath, members stand around waiting to take the call to take their part, while to the left, a small group sets out with a litter to collect the sick. Immediately in front of us is a foreshortened figure of a patrician, dressed in a blue doublet, who's collapsed on the ground, presumably sick from plague. He's attended by a doctor dressed in bright red, and to his right are 2 members of the Misericordia in black, one of whom points to the body, discussing how best to place him in the red-covered bier. Immediately behind is another brother in black, holding his nose to prevent breathing in the corrupt air, which they believed contained plague. On the left, at the bottom of the steps leading up to the main entrance of the cathedral, there are two priests wearing white surplices and black hats, who are following three brothers carrying a crucifix and lit tapers, reflecting not just their religious function, but also a way to purify the air through fire. Luigi Baccio del Bianco was also concerned to depict the personal reactions of members of the public. In the foreground, to the far left, a mother and a child support each other and watch the events in the piazza. In front of them is a man in a red hat and a woman in a white bonnet and blue dress, pointing vigorously to the events before them. While in the center background, a woman dressed in red runs towards the headquarters of the Misericordia to reclaim a small child, looking through the fence at the brothers' activities. So this picture provides a vivid idea of what it was like to live through plague, mirroring both official and individual reactions to an unfolding crisis. Indeed, today I want to concentrate less on official or medical rhetoric and more on the impact of this plague legislation on the everyday life of the inhabitants who remained in the city, not having been taken to a lazzaretto or isolation hospital or a quarantine center. To understand why people were prosecuted, it is necessary to discuss in a bit more detail the decrees introduced at the beginning of the epidemic. First, it was laid down that the head of household had to report any suspicious death or sickness to the health board, who then sent their surgeon to identify if it was or wasn't plague. Once the sick or dead person had been removed from the house to an isolation hospital or cemetery, it was locked up with all the inhabitants inside, and none were allowed to leave for 40 days, the quarantine, the quarantena, unless they were taken off to a separate quarantine center. Any materials which had been in contact with the sick, such as clothes in particular and bedclothes, were then taken away to be disinfected or burned. And this can be seen in the following slide of a print by Louis Ourier of plague in Rome in 1656. And you can see in the bottom frame things being thrown out of a house, either being perfumed to be disinfected or burned. A locksmith was then employed to put a bar nailed in place across the door, and the health board officials made daily inspection of the locked houses to make sure nobody had tried to enter or leave. Furthermore, neighbors were encouraged to make secret denunciations of anybody transgressing any of these laws and paid 10 scudi for successful prosecutions. Then in mid-January, a total quarantine or lockdown of the city was introduced, with all residents having to remain within their house for 40 days, with one adult male allowed out to collect food for the household. Now, it should be emphasized that all these measures to deal with the sick, the dead, their contacts were based on fear that they would spread plague by moving around the city, by carrying possessions such as cloth, which might contain the seeds of disease. But the question I want to look at today really are how effectively was the law put into practice? How far were the draconian punishments outlined in decrees actually enforced? And above all, what were the reactions of the women and men to these restrictions? After reading the draconian character of the laws enacted at the beginning of the epidemic, it comes as some surprise a substantial proportion of punishments were relatively mild. And this you can see from the pie chart. The first category, those arrested and imprisoned and released without a fine, accounted for 60%. And adding another third category, those released from prison after paying a fine, this rises to 71%. In the records of the judgments, the judge often declared that individuals had suffered enough through imprisonment, as in the case of the couple Margherita di Vittorio and the builder Giovan Battista di Giulio, who appeared in court on the 9th of November. They'd been arrested because they'd shown compassion, having looked after two girls who'd lived in the same house and been abandoned having lost their parents. The suspicion was that the girls could potentially have plague and spread it among themselves, but in fact they weren't sick and their protectors were then released. Other cases related to work, as in the moving story of the printer, Simone di Pierocciotti, who'd been arrested on the 4th of November for going to work in his print shop after 4 of his children had either died or been taken to the lazzaretto. He was held for 8 days, but he was released after the trial because the doctor who'd come to see the children had declared their deaths were not caused by plague, but mentioned that they puzzava di bacchi, they smelt of worms, from which they died. The priest from the parish of Santa Margherita confirmed that all three were buried in the church since they hadn't died from plague. So these results would suggest that so far Florence was less harsh in the way it dealt with infractions than many other cities in 17th century Italy. For example, in Milan, in the famous 1630 plague described by Manzoni in his Promessi Sposi, the so-called untori, the so-called plague spreaders, were punished very severely. And here you can see a whole series of ways that they were tortured and punished. The other types of reason that people were punished, or the types of punishments, including humiliation, such as people being paraded on a donkey around the street with the description of what they had done wrong around their neck, or alternatively, the system called the strappado, which meant that somebody was hung up, sort of lifted up by their arms and then dropped down until they confessed what they'd done wrong. What is significant is that only a relatively small proportion of people who were prosecuted were women, only 22%. Many of these women were prostitutes whose activities were seen as damaging to the moral fabric of the city, as in the case of Giulia de Filippo, who on 2 evenings had left her locked-up house in her street, Gomitolo dell'Oro, to go to another one around the corner in Via dell'Acqua. She was aided and abetted by a male friend who'd undone the bar across the door, and by another prostitute, Francesco di Piero Borselli, who'd received Giulia with her man friend in her own house, which had also been locked up following the sickness of death of a co-residence. The authorities indeed showed particular sensitivity to the activities of prostitutes during plague, as they saw them as contributing to the sin for which God was punishing the city. I now want to turn in the last 5 minutes to look at the overall pattern of prosecutions, and then listening carefully to the voices of those tried to understand their reactions through plague. Now, the specific reasons that people were brought to trial can be divided into 7 main categories, the largest of which were associated with the house, in other words, people entering or leaving house. So let me just give you a few examples. So there's a number of women, for example, were accused of forced entry into a theft from a locked-up house, which is most striking. A good example is the wife of a builder called Il Rovinato, literally a wreck, who'd been nursing her sick sister. When the sister died of plague, she returned home, but on the way was caught in the street carrying a blouse, so once again cloth, and when stopped and asked what she was doing, admitted naively that it had belonged to her sister, who'd been taken off to Lazzaretto. The reason that she'd broken into her sister's flat was that her own daughter had implored her to do so because it had been promised to her by her aunt, and it was her favourite blouse. I want finally to turn to discuss in a few more examples of individuals prosecuted in more detail. A feature which typifies the employees of the health board was an almost obsessive concern with entrances and exits of houses, including windows, doors and thresholds, and even roofs. A surprising number were caught in the street, talking to people in locked-up houses, as in the case on the 7th of October of Mona Maria and Antonio di Francesco Trabalesi. It was in fact Antonio's testimony which has survived because it was he who was arrested, and I quote, "Yeah, last Wednesday, I was walking towards Portoella Croce, and when I was close to the gate, a woman called Mona Maria, who was locked in a house by the health board, called out of the window and asked me how I was. Come stai, caro? I said to her that I was fine, and while I was talking to her, the police officers came and took me to prison. When questioned, he declared that the window through which Mona Maria talked was on the ground floor, but that he was standing on the other side of the street." So here's an example of a person, Mona Maria, who could potentially infect an acquaintance, since if she was sick, could have breathed out infected air, since she wasn't wearing a mask. However, evidently, since Antonio was some distance away, it wasn't regarded as a risk, and he was released. A surprising number were caught in the street, caught talking to people in locked-up houses. Though through their concern with spaces, we also learn much about neighborhood and family ties and everyday relations and practices, which would not normally have been recorded. As in the case of Mona Betta d'Antonia, a wool weaver by profession, who'd been arrested on the 8th of November, because she said in her trial, "This morning, I'd let down a basket out of my upstairs window. because my son had asked me to mend a pair of socks. So I let down the basket so that he could put them inside for me, since he was locked up in the rooms beneath me. Then a gentleman of the health board arrived and saw the basket and took me to prison. Now, evidently her explanation was regarded as innocent enough. She was allowed to return home, and indeed her somewhat repetitive testimony would seem to reflect direct speech. These records also reveal the strength of networks of friendship, as in the ostensibly innocent case of Lucrezia di Francesco Bianchi, who'd been arrested 2 days after the imposition of the total quarantine of the city on the 22nd of January 1631, and I quote, "I live in Via del Campaccio in Ognissanti, and about a month ago I returned to the house of Lorenzo the Miller in Via della Selvia in order not to remain alone in my house during the quarantine. I returned to Via del Campaccio, as I said, but because I didn't know anybody there and didn't want to remain alone, I went to stay in this house of the miller's wife, who is my friend." When the miller's wife was interviewed, it emerged there was more to the story, because Lucrezia had no ordinary profession. She worked as a prostitute and was registered in the health board records as living in Via del Campaccio. To cover herself, the miller's wife provides a very human story for why she'd allowed Lucrezia to live with her. "Lucrezia has employed me many times to allow her to return, and above all, she's my good friend." So this case then talks the problems of solitude and boredom, which is something we've all experienced during the COVID, not normally recorded in official documents, the interruption of normal economic activity, the fear of moral pollution, and also informal networks of sociability and affection between those women, which proved stronger than fear of the law. So these extracts from trial records, I think, point to a complex interaction between authority and residents. They raise the whole question about how far rules and regulations put into effect. But the picture of a confrontation of authority and subject is too black and white to reflect the complexity of social life and individual reactions to plague. Although by their very nature, these records reflect the structures and aims of Italian judicial systems, trial records also reflect a more nuanced, animated, and less passive view of the poorer levels of society. Above all, as we've seen, these records throw light on life at the level of the neighborhood, the street, and even family, and many of the so-called crimes simply reflected the survival strategies adopted at times of crisis, mirroring the reactions of those at the lower end of society protecting family and property. We've also seen the role of cloth and clothes remained a central element in the minds of those who ran the health board, as they were seen as harboring the corrupt seeds of disease which caused plague and COVID. Thank you very much.
So hello, everybody from Vienna. I will talk about this exhibition, Corona's Ancestors, but not about the content we show in the exhibition. Yeah, no. So I will not talk about the content of the exhibition, but about the question, how do you get visitors into a carriage and costume museum during a pandemic? First of all, I would like to introduce my museum, which is the Imperial Carriage Museum, Vienna, located in a building belonging to the Schönbrunn Palace, the former summer residence of the Habsburgs in the suburbs of Vienna. But we do not belong to the palace. We are a museum which is part of the Kunsthistorisches Museum group, where all the former collections of the Imperial House of Habsburg are unified. So our museum is this building here, the former summer riding school. And here we show what remains from the transport pool, the enormous transport pool of the Habsburgs, which was, of course, dissolved at the fall of the empire in 1918. And we do not only show beautiful carriages and their harnesses, but also gorgeous paintings illustrating court life, as well as a huge collection of fantastic historic clothing, because connected to the Carriage Museum is the so-called court wardrobe, with a collection of personal garments of the imperial family and a huge collection of civil uniforms and livery of court dignitaries and court servants. Normally, we are a very well-visited museum. We have approximately 100,000 visitors a year. But this completely changed with COVID in 2020. So in March 2020, we had the first lockdown in Vienna and the museum was closed, of course. And when we finally were allowed to reopen it at the end of June, it looked like this. It was completely empty. Normally, 80% of our visitors come from abroad, are tourists, and the locals who are interested in our subjects already know the museum, and they had been recently here because just 2 years before we had completely relaunched our permanent exhibition. So the question was, what can we do to bring the locals in? And it was pretty clear from the beginning that with the subjects we normally deal with, like mobility and travel, we could not do that in a period where people were not allowed to do exactly these things. So our goals were, first of all, to create an attractive and socially relevant exhibition for local visitors, which meant that it turned out pretty soon that the only subject relevant was the pandemic, and that it would be very interesting to give a glance in history and show how our ancestors dealt with similar situations. The next goal was a quick implementation. You all know that normally in museums we have 2 or 3 years to prepare a subject, but that was not the case now because we wanted to bring people now to the museum. So it should be very fast. And then, of course, it had to be low cost because our museum, like I think most museums in the world at the moment, is experiencing really the greatest financial crisis in its history. And it was pretty clear that I would not get a lot of money from our management to make an exhibition. So this meant we had to face a lot of challenges. The first challenge was to work on a completely new topic. I am historian and art historian, but I have never been specialized in the history of medicine. So it was a completely new topic for me as a curator. And I had to do it in the shortest possible time and with very limited resources because library and archives were closed. But luckily, they are so well organized that it was possible to find a lot of primary sources, even handwritten primary sources online, and I could do the research work from my home office. The even bigger challenge was to get objects at short notice. This is a concept which in museums practically doesn't exist. You always need a lot of time to prepare an exhibition, to prepare objects for the exhibition. So it was really hard work to convince the colleagues to give me objects. I have to say that because of all these troubles, I had to work mainly with objects from our own museum's group. But even from my own colleagues, I did not get everything I wanted to have in the exhibition. And then last not least, we had to work with existing exhibition aids in order to save time and money. And we simply repainted them and adapted them for the exhibition, which means, of course, that it was also not possible to make a sumptuous staging for the exhibition. Anyway, everything was possible, and after 4 months, everything was ready. At the 5th of November, we wanted to open the exhibition, but on the 2nd of November, the second lockdown was declared in Austria. So we finally could open the exhibition only shortly before Christmas, and immediately after the 6th of January, we had to close it again. And originally, it should have lasted until Easter 2020, but at Easter we had been open only for a couple of weeks. So it will now last until Easter 2022. And we don't know how many weeks we will be open in this period because right now we are in the 5th lockdown in Vienna. So the museum is closed at the moment. What our visitors see when they first come into the museum is this, and here I can address another challenge we had. As I told you, we had completely refurbished the museum just 2 years before COVID, and the concept was not to make temporary exhibitions anymore. So we had no space especially for the exhibition, and we had to find spaces in the exhibition hall where we could put an island with information on Corona's ancestors without disturbing the rest of the presentation. And these Corona islands are all painted in this dark red. So visitors know where this dark red is. They get information on Corona's ancestors. And as a guidance between these islands, we have put historical quotes on the floor, which all are strikingly up to date. They are all, like everything in the exhibition, in German and English. And the first quote on the floor you see here is, "Admission is open only to those wearing a mask." So this could be easily a phrase we put on the entrance of the museum right now, but it comes from a ball announcement in Vienna in 1818. And this brings us right into the subject, because the whole first part of the exhibition is dedicated to the mask. The mask is the main symbol of the Corona pandemic. And I guess, like in all the other countries, in Austria, people just don't like to wear masks. And our politicians often tell us this is because the mask has no tradition in our culture. And this is not true. It has a tradition, but not a medical one. And a very positive tradition, whereas nowadays many people experience the mask as something limiting their liberty. For our ancestors, it was right the opposite. For centuries, people in Europe were born into a social place they could not leave for the rest of their lives. But once a year during Carnival, they could put on a mask and slip into a completely other identity, social group, and even into another sex without being punished. And they could express critique openly without being punished under the cover of mask. So the mask had a very positive meaning for most of our history. Here you see the oldest masks in our exhibition, beautiful tournament masks from the 16th century. And here another part of the mask section, and you see how we were putting these islands really in between of our carriages. This is the section dealing with the mask in the Baroque period. And you see one of our adapted exhibition aids, this steel with a monitor. We produced 6 videos for this exhibition with 2 aims. First of all, to give our visitors a deep information into the subjects without having a guided tour, because guided tours are simply not allowed at the moment, and also groups are not allowed. So the concept is that visitors can come alone and get all the information they need. And the second aim is to make visible all the beautiful objects dealing with our subjects, which we could not bring into the museum because of COVID. I have to say that our visitors love these videos, and even though they take each between 10 and 15 minutes, we have visitors buying tickets twice and 3 times just to have the time to see all these videos with calm. Here is another part of the mask section, and this showcase is always in the museum. Normally we present here the Imperial couple, Francis Joseph and Sissi. And in this exhibition, we show here this stunning mourning garment of Empress Elizabeth with this really unique mourning mask, an invention by her, a mask of black velvet with brows of shed pearls. And it's really a stunning object, which our visitors love a lot. And like most of the objects we show, it is normally in storage, because all these objects dealing with mask and with mourning and death and illness normally are not attractive to the visitors. Here you see how the section where we start to talk about pandemics. We speak in this exhibition about 4 pandemics: the plague, the smallpox, the cholera, and the Spanish flu. And we try to show people how strikingly similar the measurements fighting these pandemics were already in the late Middle Ages and early modern period. We have heard about this also in the previous talk. Normally, this part of the museum is just a walkthrough. We have a lot of groups with up to 50 persons, so we need a lot of space to guide these groups from one exhibition hall to the next. But at the moment, we don't have groups. They're not even allowed. So we could use this space as an exhibition space and put showcases right in the middle. And here we are in the next hall, where we always show the beautiful Baroque carriages of the Habsburgs. In this part, we talk about the smallpox and about the introduction of inoculation in the 18th century. So the showcases are new, they're normally not there. And we try always also to integrate objects we have normally on display if this is possible. And this is the case with this painting. It's a beautiful group portrait of Empress Maria Theresa, her husband, and their many, many children, made in 1764. And on this stele, we show what happened just 3 years later. In 1767, a huge smallpox pandemic attacked Vienna and the imperial household, and all the persons marked in color here had been affected. There were several deaths in the imperial family. Maria Theresa herself felt ill, but she survived. And afterwards, she decided to fight this pandemic. And so she introduced inoculation, which is the predecessor of vaccination in Austria. And the 3 boys marked in green were among the first persons in Austria to get inoculation. Right opposite this group, our visitors normally see this. This is one of the Baroque coronation carriages, and behind you see a painting showing its use at the coronation in Frankfurt. And what might seem strange is that it has so much black on it. And here we talk about a court mourning. When a member of the imperial family died, everything had to be black for at least 6 months. And when several members died, one after the other, like in 1767, this meant that the whole court was in black maybe for even more than a year. And then everything had to become black. And for instance, for a marriage during such a period, even the carriages had to be black. So this coronation carriage was completely painted and fitted in black in the late 18th century. And we added also this showcase in order to show that also the clothing had to become completely black. On the left, you see the livery servants would normally wear with this type of carriage in silk velvet with colors and gold decoration. And on the right, you see the same outfit for a mourning period, everything in the same style, but in black. And also the material had to be much simpler. This is all made of rough cloth. Here we come to the next section, to the cholera. So we are at the beginning of the 19th century here, and you see the beautiful painting, which is also the motif of our poster. And this is among the objects I did not get, because the curator said it's in such bad condition that it's not possible to make it fit for exhibition in such a short time. So we took a high-res photograph of it and had it animated and transformed into a modern installation. And I tried to show this to you. I hope it will work. So this is what our visitors see and hear in the exhibition. Cholera is Austria is the young lady sitting in the front. She sits on a hill near Vienna. In the background, you see the city of Vienna. And above her is Cholera, the black angel of death, pouring poisonous water and poisonous breath to Austria and Vienna. And the music you hear is the waltz Cheerful Also in Rough Times, which was composed during the first cholera pandemic in 1831 by no one else than Johann Strauss. And it was for the first time performed during the pandemic at a charity to raise money for the victims of cholera. The last section of the exhibition deals with the Spanish flu. And here we were able once again to introduce an object from our own collection. In the showcase, you see the uniform of an employee of the Ministry of Public Health. Interestingly enough, Austria was the first country in the world to have such a ministry, and it started to work quite ironically right in the middle of 1918, summer 1918, when the first peak of the Spanish flu arrived. And it seems that the ministry dealt this pandemic very, very badly. And so the last quote we have on our floor is, "The so-called Ministry of Health only seems to function when everyone is healthy." And this is a phrase you could easily find also nowadays in Viennese newspapers, but it's from the Workers' Newspaper in 1918. A couple of months after the opening of the exhibition, we were asked by Vienna's Fashion and Design School if we were willing to show some works of their students, because during lockdown 1, they had asked their students to create in homeschooling masks inspired by the plague masks of the Baroque. And we thought this is a very nice idea to make a link to the actual situation. And so we show also this little showcase here. To come to an end, I can say that we are very happy that we faced these challenges, because the exhibition is a great success. We had a lot of interest from national and international media. We have really increased our visitors. Before we were reduced to only 20 to 30 visitors a day, and now we have between 100 and 200 visitors a day, which is still not what we have normally, but it's a big improvement. And what is really beautiful for all of us is that for the first time, we are getting fan posts from our visitors. Many visitors write us and tell us that they are so glad they have seen the exhibition, because it helped them so much to deal with the actual situation. And this is really also what we wanted to achieve with it. Thank you very much.
So good afternoon to all of you. I'm Ppe Shapira from the Mandel Jewish Art and Life Wing at the Israel Museum in Jerusalem. And I'm very glad and excited to virtually meet with you all in these complex times. Next slide, please. At the Mandel Wing for Jewish Art and Life, I'm the curator in charge of the collection of Jewish dress and textiles and objects related to Jewish life cycle ceremonies. As some of you may know, our costume collection is one of the most extensive and unique collections of pre-modern and traditional dress worldwide. It comprises of some 10,000 items of dress worn by Jews from all around the world. And in most cases, Jews were dressed just like their surrounding society. So this collection is actually a microcosmos of traditional world's dress. Throughout the years, the Wing's curators have been researching these dress items, and for my talk here today, I'm also much thankful for all of them, to all of them. Next slide, please. Thank you. This unique collection was presented in the book The Jewish Wardrobe, followed by the temporary exhibition Dress Codes Revealing the Jewish Wardrobe, which opened here at the museum in 2014. Next slide. And then next slide. Thank you. And later on, I traveled to New York and to San Francisco. As with many of you, being the curator of such a collection means that one of the things that interests me most, also during the COVID-19 pandemic, is clothing, and what kind of dress codes have been adopted on the streets or during ceremonies and festive occasions. Next slide, please. And this is me and my husband in our 25th anniversary, which we were supposed to celebrate in Berlin next week, but we won't. Of course, as we've all experienced, one of the most visible changes are the face masks, as we can see them all around us. And even in these hard and stressful times, people choose to continue and celebrating life, culture, and different events while protecting oneself and staying safe. Actually, this idea of keeping safe and protecting those who are going through different ceremonies and life events takes me back to the museum's prestigious dress collection. It made me wonder, how did people in the past protect their loved ones in former generations and in traditional societies? How did people act in different times of distress during epidemics, for example? So let me take you now on a short tour trying to look at our collection, not through its glamour or highly crafted workmanship and textiles, but let us look at the clothes' ability to reflect times of trouble and the fragility of life. The next slide, please. Thank you. It may seem surprising, but often when we look closely at ceremonial dress worn at rites of passage such as birth, weddings, and even death, we see that in their design and in the decoration, symbolic protective meanings and amuletic motifs are hidden, wishing the wearer good luck. This is especially true in babies' clothes, in their wrapping and in their concealing. At a time when child mortality was widespread, this was especially true. The baby's items seen here for the first ceremonies following birth from Iraq are tailored in European style, but feature the silver tinsel and gilt metal thread embroidery typical of Baghdadi Jewish textiles, a khamsa, or a hand motif, and blue beads imitating an eye have been embroidered to protect the infant against the evil eye. The next slide, please. Another way to protect young children, especially young boys who were considered more vulnerable to the evil forces, was to mask their masculine identity, dressing them as girls. This could be seen in these Yemenite head covers, which were usually attributed to Jewish girls, but also worn by little Jewish boys up to the age of 3 and 4, but with a difference, a small difference, which is the fox's hair tassel at the top of the boy's hood. So you mask the identity, but you still have some differentiation. Amuletic traditions are found in many babies' clothes, but sometimes there are individual specific stories, clothes that were made for special reasons. Can I have the next slide, please? This dress was made for a young girl who fell ill with smallpox, a highly dangerous disease at the time. The dress bears an asymmetrical pattern believed to ward off evil forces by confusing them. The embroidery incorporates cowrie shells and a red thread, symbolizing fertility and vitality. This dress is from Sana'a, Yemen. The girl for whom this dress was sewn did in fact recover from her illness, but she continued to wear the garment as protection against other many dangers facing children at the time. Next slide, please. Another unique example from our collection is this shirt from for a baby boy from Salonika, born after his older siblings haven't survived their early life. This shirt was made for a newborn boy from the linen textile used for his grandmother's burial shrouds. Linen was considered to be a textile who has healing and protective powers, especially for newborn babies, against the demoness Lilith, who is considered very harmful to newborn babies and their mothers. Also, the wearing of a shroud was meant to confuse the evil forces and keep them away. It's a way of concealing the identity, not by a mask, for example, but by confusing between the dress of the dead and the dress of the living. Next slide, please. Amuletic traditions, emphasizing wishes for good luck and happiness and passage ceremonies, among them wedding occasions, are known till our days all over the world. At the right side of the slide, a 1947 dress from New York is seen. It was made at Henry Bendel, and it presents a well-known Western tradition for a happy, fertile and lucky wedding, saying that the bride's outfit should incorporate something old, something new, something borrowed, and something blue, a tradition which gained popularity during the Victorian times. In this dress, something blue is the satin ribbon hidden on the inside of the dress, and you can see it at the top. Something borrowed has long since been returned to the lender. Something new is the silk dress itself, and something old is the Burano lace of the veil, made in the early 19th century. Many times, these traditions are related to the facial veil, covering the bride's face and thus protecting her from evil forces or glances, the evil eye, for example. In traditional dress, the veil may also be related to issues of modesty, a modesty as being a protective measure against all harmful things, even epidemics. Next slide, please. During the coronavirus pandemic, the subject of modesty and it being a possible cure has also risen, such as seen in this poster that was posted here in several neighborhoods in Jerusalem. According to this poster, modest dress among women will put an end to the pandemic and will also save the lives of thousands of religious men who are now led towards sin, accusing women, and especially their immodest dress, as the cause of epidemics, tragedies, and natural disasters is something that is unfortunately found throughout human history and also in Jewish writings. I've recently read that, for example, during the 1866 cholera epidemic in Ukraine, the Hasidic community of Uman blamed it on the Jewish women wearing crinolines and earrings. Immodest dress worn by women was also stated as the reason for some landslides, terror attacks, and pogroms in 19th and 20th century Israel. Women's covering is therefore many times interpreted as a way to prevent or to overcome hard times. Next slide, please. The contemporary veiling, covering of Jewish, Muslim, and Christian women was the focus of Noam Bar'am Ben Yosef's exhibition, Veiled Women of the Holy Land, opened here at the museum in 2019, an exhibition which we will be glad to travel to other venues. In her exhibition, Noam presents different aspects of veiling, among them the belief of the Jewish veiled women that by covering themselves, by dressing modestly, they can create a change for the better. The modest dress has the power to redeem, to influence upper worlds, either in cases of personal difficulties, such as sickness, or broader national communal aspects. As Noam notes, the phenomenon of the contemporary veiled Jewish women started around the year 2000, the Second Intifada, the Palestinian uprising, a time when there were several terror attacks, bus bombings near the ultra-Orthodox neighborhoods of Jerusalem. During one of these attacks, a Jewish woman wearing a shawl got out without being hurt. Only her shawl was damaged, and this became, for some, a sign to add layers of modesty to their dress. Some of the Jewish women whom Noam interviewed also related to modest dress of past generations and biblical women as their inspiration, and in a way, by continuing the past, they feel protected. Next slide, please. Talking about the past, we know that since ancient times, in areas such as Mesopotamia and the Mediterranean, women covered or veiled themselves. Many times they were married women or women of high status, Women who were protected were allowed to avail themselves, while servants, working women, and prostitutes were denied this possibility. So actually the veiling was a status symbol. This idea of veiling entered the Islamic way of dress and became a characteristic notion in the dress of Muslim women, but also in the dress of Jewish women living in Islamic countries, such as the examples seen here, combining wraps and face covers. In some places, among them Baghdad, as can be seen on the right slide here, on the right side of the slide here, wearing wraps of a certain type was a once general custom that over time became confined to the Jewish community. Before leaving her home, a Jewish woman would wrap herself in an izar, a light-colored silk cloth embroidered with gilt metal threads. Her face would be covered with a chiliya, a black veil made of horsehair. Now she was ready to go out into the world. In other cases, such as the Afghani example on the left, the wraps worn by Jewish women testified to the migration of a tradition. For example, the chador worn in Mashhad, Iran, was brought by Jews to Afghanistan, and in Herat, only Jewish women wore this particular garment. These wraps were intended to extend the protection afforded by the walls of their homes. In a way, the face cover is a kind of a mask. And just like the masks we are all obliged to wear today as a protection from the COVID-19, these old-time masks offered another kind of protection. The next slide, please. And just like these traditional masks, and in the dress items I've shown, we can also find amuletic and protective motifs on contemporary masks. These are all from the online. You may note the eye, the khamsa, and the blue color. I have presented here today several aspects and thoughts about clothes created in fragile or distressing times. Some of the ideas expressed through these clothes have stayed with us for several generations and more. Others have disappeared. And I wonder what elements of clothing or other insights related to the way we dress or consume fashion will stay with us for the future. Next slide, please. Thank you all, and happy Hanukkah and happy holidays.
The outbreak of the coronavirus pandemic meant that we all had to come to terms with the necessity to wear anti-COVID face masks. The hygienic article they were meant to be quickly began to function as a fashion accessory as well. Anyway, it's hard for it to happen otherwise. After all, it is our face that primarily attracts eyes. So the aesthetic anti-COVID face masks could become a decorative element of fashion styling. However, this is not the function of the anti-COVID face masks that I want to focus on today. I would like to trace what message the face masks could convey. So let's start from the beginning. As our conference is the part of Solidarity Project, I think that I will mention something which is very much connected with solidarity. And in March 2020, a pandemic begins and a lockdown has been announced. It quickly turned out that in the absence of vaccine for the new virus, a hygienic face mask is the most effective in preventing its transmission. Unfortunately, along with the sharp increase in the supply of face masks, it turned out that they began to be scarce on the market or reached alarmingly high prices in Poland. The most disturbing thing was that hospitals and other branches of health service were running out of medical face masks as well. In this situation, everyone owning a sewing machine was putting aside other works to sew face masks for friends and, on a larger scale, for hospitals. And this is taken from Facebook, where the group were organized of Polish dressmakers, and this is Polish Dressmakers in Action, and it was widespread action of Polish dressmakers, and such an actions were widespread in the whole Poland, and not only dressmakers but also amateurs, volunteers were taking part in it. And these homemade face masks were not used in places where surgeries were made or in the parts dedicated to COVID-infected patients, but fulfilled their protective function in regular wards. The rules for the cotton fabric area density used for face masks and the cut allowing the insertion of a replaceable filter were quickly established. The pattern did not count. Face masks were sewn from all available materials with the recommended parameters, but in different patterns, with polka dots, dogs, flowers, stripes, birds. But if the batch of face masks was large and diverse, this batch coming to the hospital, for example, it gave an opportunity to show off and choose the most tasteful patterns according to the user. Over time, these are photos from the action organized in the northern Poland. Also, dressmakers were making face masks for the health service. Over time, supplies of hygienic face masks began to cover at least the needs of health services, while the slow departure from lockdown increased the demand for face masks that had to be worn in public spaces, in shops, buses, etc. Also, there were several actions, for example, in the museums where renovators were sewing face masks for museum employees, and such an action was also in our museum. And these are 2 face masks made during this action. And also civilians from outside the health service wore hand-sewn cotton face masks. Sometimes it was necessary to wear a face mask with a pattern completely inappropriate to gender, age, or profession. Often these were because often those cotton was taken from the children's bedding because it had appropriate area density. However, no one was ashamed because he wore masks that were created thanks to the dedicated work of Polish dressmakers. And as the pandemic progressed, the pattern began to gain importance, and I just wanted to show the production, 2 examples of masks made by our clothing company, Medicine, which is well known for cooperating with young Polish designers. So they were preparing designs for these masks. In the spring, when the face masks could be still considered as not readily available article, there were also various tips in the internet how to make a face mask in the easiest way, intended for people who had never had a needle in their hands. I think that I've chosen the most interesting solution. It's drawing on the art of origami, and it is the face mask designed by Professor Anna Myczkowska-Szczerska, professor of our art Academy of Art in Krakow. And on the right-hand side, you can see the beautiful origami face masks. It's made along with her project. And those face masks could be made of paper towels or interfacing fabric rubbers, and were fastened with paper clips. And they had ordinary rubbers to put over the ears. Interestingly, such masks were promoted by our First Lady, Agata Kornhauser-Duda, in the special shows, special films showing step by step how to fold such a face mask. And this is the scheme, how to make this face mask invented by Anna Myczkowska-Szczerska. And now we go to ritual masks, because the pandemic began in spring, and spring, to be precise, May, is very important time for many Catholics in Poland, because the time of 8 or 9 years old children's first Holy Communion, that is their first full participation in the Holy Mass. It's in the first class of the primary school. It is one of those celebrations in which the dress code is extremely important. For years, discussions have been held about to what extent the first Holy Communion costumes can be decorative and expensive, especially the girls' dresses. It was argued that by paying excessive attention to clothes and, as is part of our tradition, expensive gifts, it distracts from what is most important, that is, from the first meeting with God during the Holy Mass. It has been argued that the dress code should not emphasize social inequality at this ceremony. Here you can see two beautiful, very expensive dresses decorated with lace. Many parishes dealt with this problem by sewing the same modest costumes for all girls and boys from the parish, decorated only with a modest religious motifs. Thanks to this, poorer children should not feel inferior to children from wealthy families. However, it is impossible to unify everything, and there is still a whole range of accessories to show off: wreaths, band decorations, gloves, handbags, capes, shoes. A lot of them are very decorative and very expensive. So even if the dress is modest, the accessory can be very expensive. And the masks, face masks, have also recently joined to this list. Their appearance sparked a discussion about what is appropriate for the First Communion outfit and what is not. Is a lace mask suitable for a First Communion child? Should it be also modest? The answers were very different, and here we can see the beautiful modest First Communion mask from our collections. It was used in the May 2020. It's in the National Museum in Krakow collection. But here you can see the print screen from the internet, and you can see many different, very decorative First Communion masks, mostly made decorated with lace, but there are also embroidered ones. They are very decorative. And so the face mask became part of the ritual religious outfit. And it happened again in this year. But I think that the most interesting in Poland in 2020 was another function of the face masks, that is, because I want to say some words about the face masks which expressed resistance to different things. And we all know slogan face masks, designed mostly to tame the fear of coronavirus. But at this point, I want to focus on different kind of resistance, of informative face masks. The first is the group of anti-mandate or anti-penalty face masks. Such face masks were sewn in large numbers as an expression of resistance against the obligation of wearing masks in the open air, announced in spring 2020, and criticized mostly by people exercising outside. All these resistance face masks had one feature: they were very permeable. So they were only a dummy anti-COVID face masks. Usually they were sewn from gauze or one layer of polyester fabric. And here you can see a lovely resistance face mask, and they really had the name anti-penalty mask, and it was really common to call them like that. It is made of thin cotton used for diapers, and look at the pattern, which was not accidentally selected because it is the motif pattern of crowns. So this funny mask was made in the spring of 2020 in Krakow, and now it belongs to our collections. But the greatest political career face mask made in the end of October 2020, when protests broke out in Poland, and they were related to a ruling of the Constitutional Tribunal, the consequence of which was to tighten the law on abortion in Poland. These protests, initially largely spontaneous, were supported by various organizations, including the Feminist Women's Strike. And here you can see the photo from the protest. And you can see, it's not much visible, but you can see that many women on this photo have the black face masks. And I will tell you why, black, not white or colorful. Earlier in April 2020, a women's strike poster by Ola Janiszewska was created with a female head in a mask with the symbol of the strike, the women's strike, the lightning. And here you can see this symbol from the poster. When the larger scale protest began in October 2020, it turned out that the lightning sign is so easily recognizable that many participants of the demonstrations began to put it under face masks, regardless of whether they liked the women's strike or not. And due to the simplicity of the motif, the manifestation mask could be easily made at home. And here you have two examples of such manifestation face mask. One is decorated with embroidery, and the second one is decorated with applique. Over time, the protests were taken over entirely by the feminist movement. And during these manifestations, it turned out that the mask is much more effective medium of political declaration than a t-shirt, because it taken over the function of the t-shirt. We know that the blouse or t-shirt is this part of clothing we are used to put slogans on, and now we have something which catches eye. It is on the face, and we have to think what short slogan or what symbol we can put on it to show our to show what we think. And it is worth noting that those masks started to be worn on a daily basis. It is worth noting that such great popularity of the lightning mask, face masks, was caused by a very strong polarization of political views in Poland. I think that this political polarization in Poland we can compare to this time in the USA, where the supporters and opponents of Donald Trump were fighting. The easily recognizable symbol of the lightning quickly became a declaration of anti-government attitude, and many people wore lightning face masks on a daily basis in trams, at works, in shops. And I can say that now, even now, this is the people which are in opposition to the government can buy them in every possible kind on the internet. There are companies producing masks also produce this manifestation lightning masks. And as a reaction to masks with the lightnings, also pro-life masks were created, but mostly by Catholic organizations, but it was on a much more smaller scale. And this we can see two pro-life masks. As you can see, this black men's mask on the left-hand side is could be compared with this lightning mask, because this is the same color, and it from the distance it could look quite the same. And I think that this is the most important thing which happens to the face masks in Poland. And I think that the anti-COVID face mask that had to be worn every day in all circumstances related to social life turned out to be an excellent carrier of various kinds of content, and also with strongly political content. And thank you very much.
So the exhibition Undercover from Necessity to Luxury, the evolution of face coverings during COVID-19, opened on the 11th of May 2021, 1 year on from when the UK government first advised people to wear face coverings in closed public spaces. It explored how masks evolved from being functional PPE objects in short supply to becoming an everyday object worn by millions. The simple cloth face covering, which appears to be an unassuming and uncomplicated object, had quickly become a symbolic and contentious artifact. The exhibition explored how these ordinary objects have been transformed from their medical origins to become a highly desirable fashion accessory produced by companies ranging from Boohoo Man to Louis Vuitton. While these masks appear to be non-gendered, their design, marketing and wearing reveal long-running narratives within menswear concerned with ideas of protection, risk and masculinity.
The University of Westminster put out a funding call on the 14th of May 2020 for research projects in response to COVID-19, and our successful bid proposed that the Westminster Menswear Archive would research and document the rapidly evolving reaction to COVID-19 by the British menswear industry to the national shortage of PPE through the acquisition of examples of these and related artefacts. These objects would form the primary content of an online exhibition in 2021, exploring the UK response to the pandemic 1 year on. This approach would interrogate the emerging object-related responses to COVID-19 as design solutions to specific PPE problems, and chart how a new product category within menswear was developed, formalised and adopted by the public.
Pictured here is a Wawa mask that was released via Instagram by the Manchester-based company on the 23rd of March 2020, the date that the British Prime Minister announced the first lockdown in the UK. The curators decided this would be a year-long project, beginning with the first lockdown, 23rd of March 2020, and ending 1 year later on the 22nd of March 2021. A revised collection policy for COVID-19 artefacts was created, outlining the Westminster Menswear's response. The object collection presented several challenges. These included the uncertainty of knowing what objects would be produced and how we'd be able to access them, the rapidly evolving response to COVID-19 and face coverings, and thus the public mood for an exhibition and the appropriate approach that had to be taken as a result. During this period, almost all websites banned the reselling of face coverings, which made it challenging later when we were trying to acquire objects produced at the beginning of COVID-19 in the UK, which were now unavailable. Given the emerging information around COVID-19 in March 2020 and the potential for face coverings to still be contaminated, it was decided only to collect new face coverings.
In addition to collecting objects created in response to COVID-19 between 2020 and 21, the archive intended to acquire examples of face coverings created by menswear designers before COVID-19 to contextualise the response. Pictured here is a mask produced by Samuel Ross for his brand A Cold Wall in 2018.
In early April 2020, Boohoo Man released a black face covering with a white skull printed on it. It was quickly withdrawn from sale after complaints in the UK newspapers as it was in poor taste and that it was wrong to sell fashion face masks when there was a shortage of PPE for health workers. In December 2020, 8 months later, the archive was able to locate one of these Boohoo Man masks in Japan, where it had previously been imported by a company that specialised in selling British fashion goods to the Japanese. The archive then arranged for the mask to be shipped back to the United Kingdom.
We bought our first mask on the 29th of May online from Adidas. They were the first major company to produce consumer-focused masks. Like everyone else, we were in lockdown for a substantial period of the project, so the sourcing of the various masks was done primarily through searching online via e-retailers or through Grailed, StockX, eBay and Etsy. Additionally, we used our industry contacts to find out who might be making a new face covering. We needed to react to events as they occurred because we knew the ephemeral nature of these objects would cause them to vanish quickly. Most of the items we gathered are no longer available for purchase, and many come from defunct websites. Some physical stores such as Burton and Topshop in the UK have also now closed.
Another significant challenge was predicting both the emerging narratives throughout the exhibition and the objects might be produced in the remaining year. Given the normal seasonal structure of fashion production in its display by runway shows, it's common to see garments at least 6 months before they hit retail and be able to plan ahead. However, the disruption caused to both production and the international fashion weeks meant that this was not possible. In addition, face coverings were a new untested product category for most menswear brands, which meant that not all of them would necessarily be producing them. There were several designers we hoped would create face coverings, but did not during our research period. Alexander McQueen was the most notable, given its history of referencing face coverings in their collections. While in July 2020, Vivienne Westwood produced a face mask solely for her friends and acquaintances to promote a climate revolution campaign, it was not until November 2020 that the company released a consumer-facing face covering.
And we also documented the setting in which the masks were marketed on the internet. As a new product category, many businesses were unsure where to actually place these objects. Many companies gendered the way they were classified, i.e. they were discovered by searching companies' websites under both menswear and womenswear categories, or simply only one of these categories. This image of the Henry Lloyd website from 2020 shows how the product was advertised differently to men and women. Later in the year, we were able to resume physical retail purchases, and this Balenciaga mask was purchased from Harvey Nichols department store in August. Its presentation, kept within a glass case, employs both the display language of art, elevating the apparent value of the piece, and alludes to its problematic nature as a potentially contaminated object that must be sealed off to avoid contaminating the rare world of luxury shopping. Burberry was another luxury brand that we looked at, and the rise of the designer mask hit the headlines in August with the announcement of Burberry launching their range, and they retailed in the UK at £90. Though announced in August, they were not actually available to purchase until October and sold out online within minutes or hours. And this is how they were marketed on the Burberry website, and they were treated as a fashion drop, an exclusive item that was given pre-publicity to maximise interest and rarity. And the Burberry face mask came in very elaborate packaging as well. It was heavily packaged inside a box, which contained another box tied with a ribbon, and the face mask was inside a drawstring bag, which was then wrapped in tissue paper.
Despite the archive collecting the face coverings almost as soon as they were produced and available for purchase online, many of these objects had incomplete information. For example, several products did not include their release date, the country of manufacture, or the materials used. Further research was conducted by contacting brands and designers directly, or through their public relations representatives. While many were extremely helpful, some did not respond to multiple requests or could only provide us with incomplete information. The most common request for information was the date that the object was released, but companies or PR representatives could only provide a broad answer in many cases. Some also did not want their products featured in the exhibition or refused to answer inquiries. The off-white face mask, pictured here, includes multiple digital and tracking processes within its packaging. These include barcodes, QR codes, CERTI logo, and radio frequency identification tagging. However, none of these reveal the release date, and the company's public relations firm could not tell us when this mask first went on sale.
Pictured here is Louis Vuitton LV shield that was first seen being worn by fashion journalist Brian Boy on his TikTok page.
Today was the worst. Louis Vuitton invited me to their women's fashion show in Paris. I wasn't sure if I should come because there's a virus going around. Her name is Miss Corona, and she ain't going nowhere. I love elevating everyday experiences. I like to protect myself from the virus with my face mask. I also got this face shield for double protection. You know who? From the haters. I love that Louis Vuitton has my health in mind. Stay safe, kids. Yay. Yeah.
So after seeing this TikTok post, we made several inquiries to Vuitton to see if we could purchase one of the masks, but they confirmed that the mask was from the women's cruise collection, so we couldn't buy it for our menswear archive. Of the 52 masks in the exhibition, 43 were purchased online, 6 were donated, and 3 were purchased in person at Liberty, Balenciaga, and Louis Vuitton. Only 2 of the masks, our police mask and the climate revolution mask, had previously been worn.
So the exhibition opened online on the 11th of May 2021, and this is the front page of the exhibition. The graphic languaging point for the exhibition was based on medical and pharmaceutical packaging. The blue-black backdrop was taken from the packaging of a box of Type 2R face masks, while the font used, Classico URW, is widely used for medical products. We showed the masks in chronological order, so we wanted to use the mask to tell the story of the last year and mimicking the numerous websites that we've been exploring that showed the 100 best face masks to buy right now. We also wanted to represent the fashion response, so we deliberately collected masks from labels and brands rather than, for example, homemade. So that helped narrow down the selection. It was interesting how quickly the face coverings being produced started referencing the National Health Service, Black Lives Matter, climate change, and other events of the last 12 months. We publicized the exhibition on Instagram and decided to run it there for the duration of the exhibition, posting 2 images of masks each day in chronological order. Here you can see the online post for the Huntsman face mask. However, what we hadn't realized is that Instagram had shadow banned our posts for the fact that they mentioned the word COVID-19. And that meant that the Instagram posts got very low engagement in comparison to our usual posts. We were unable to also promote our posts as they were judged to be contravening Instagram's COVID-19 policy, which reads, ads must not contain content that exploits crises, controversial political, social issues for commercial purposes. This includes using urgency or guaranteed prevention claims to promote supplies and products related to COVID-19. Ads may not promote the sale of COVID-19 vaccines or services that expedite access to COVID-19 vaccines. Additionally, ads must not promote the sale of medical masks and COVID-19 test kits. Ads promoting non-medical masks, hand sanitizers, and surface disinfecting wipes are restricted to eligible advertisers who meet the criteria outlined in our Business Health Centre. So here is some of the press that we received, and this includes press we got in the British Medical Journal that covered the exhibition. The exhibition concluded with 365 photographs of discarded masks presented chronologically. This section was called Undercover from Necessity to Debris, the pollution of face coverings during COVID-19. Only 2 of the 52 objects in the main exhibition section had previously been worn. The rest were brand new and thus had no biographical connection to a previous owner or wearer. The 365 face coverings in the discarded section, on the other hand, appeared to have been worn at least once, but no information about their previous owners was available. While the images used for the new mask in the main section of the show were purposely digitally enhanced, photoshopped and manipulated, the photographs of the discarded masks were not. The methodology for the discarded mask was to shoot each mask from above that I spotted on my daily walk until I'd captured 365. The masks were photographed from above with the camera parallel to the frame's primary structures, such as the pavement edge or painted road markers. In this way, the photos were given a formal framing technique. So there you can see one of the examples of the masks. While the 365 images are displayed on the Westminster Menswear Archive website, they were also minted as non-fungible tokens, or NFTs, and hosted on OpenSea, the world's largest NFT marketplace. Using blockchain, NFTs serve to verify ownership of digital or physical artifacts. 52 of the 365 NFTs created were available for free during the exhibition's run. Curators were interested in bringing to light issues of ownership and value creation within the fashion system, as well as the curatorial process. While ownership of the digital record on the blockchain would be transferred out of the archive, it would remain within the digital collection created for the exhibition. As a result, while new value may have been created from the digital artifact, it would still exist in perpetuity as a form of curation recorded on the blockchain.
So in conclusion, we always intended for the COVID-19 face covering project to last a year, beginning with the first lockdown in March 2020. So for us, the exhibition is the completion of this project. However, we are currently submitting an AHRC research network application with academics from Manchester Met to expand our mask research next year. The primary goal of this network, titled Seeing Through the Mask, is to bring together international perspectives from fashion, anthropology, psychology, sociology, and public health to investigate the effects of long-term mask wearing on self and social identities during the COVID-19 pandemic and beyond. Thank you.
Bonjour, bonjour à tous. Merci beaucoup Corinne d'avoir organisé cette journée qui fait un peu le bilan de nos différentes initiatives. Je vais donc essayer de rattraper une partie du temps que nous avons perdu en début de séance. Et donc, je vais aller peut-être un petit peu vite sur certains aspects, mais on pourra avoir le temps bien sûr d'échanger. Vous aurez mes coordonnées pour si vous avez des questions. Je voulais commencer, et je vais donc être très rapide, mais par dire un mot du MUSEM, simplement pas pour m'appesantir sur son architecture ou ses expositions, mais pour vous dire son intérêt pour les thématiques contemporaines, puisque le musée fonde une grande partie de sa politique d'acquisition sur des enquêtes collectes, c'est-à-dire des programmes de recherche sur le terrain, sur lesquels partent conservateurs et enquêteurs, chercheurs, sur une thématique donnée, pour à la fois documenter ce phénomène et collecter des objets, enrichir les collections. Cet intérêt pour le contemporain, donc il est très marqué dans notre politique d'acquisition, très marqué dans notre politique d'exposition. Et lors de la crise que nous avons traversée, que nous continuons de traverser, il a été, je dirais, peut-être un peu challengé, remis en question sur nos modes de fonctionnement. Et ce questionnement nous a poussé à travailler autrement sur la collecte du contemporain et à lancer des projets participatifs dont la collecte confinement aura été le premier opus et peut-être que nous aurons d'autres dans l'avenir. En tout cas, nous envisageons d'en mener d'autres de cette manière-là. Alors, la collecte confinement, avec cette image que j'aime beaucoup, qui a été l'un des produits de cette collecte, cette petite Madeleine, ce petit gâteau qui regarde désespérément par sa fenêtre, et le symbole, enfin, est devenu un peu un des symboles de cette collecte, que nous avons lancé le 20 avril 2020. relativement tôt à l'aune de la crise en général, mais finalement beaucoup moins rapidement en France que les services d'archives qui se sont mobilisés très tôt, dès les premières semaines de confinement, dès le début du mois d'avril, pour lancer une collecte de témoignages, de documents archivistiques sur ce phénomène. Le MUSEM s'intéressant à l'objet, il nous paraissait, nous, plus opportun, du coup, de ne pas doublonner avec ces initiatives des services d'archives sur tout le territoire français, mais de nous intéresser à l'objet, en ce qu'il pouvait traduire de la situation de nos concitoyens, de nos contemporains, et de comment est-ce que l'objet pouvait finalement être le synonyme, le traducteur de ces phénomènes sociaux qui nous traversaient. Désolée, j'étais à peu près sûre de ça, de l'irruption de ma fille, qui fera donc la conférence avec moi si vous n'y voyez pas d'inconvénient. Le principe de cette collecte était de demander aux personnes qui voulaient y participer de nous fournir à la fois une photographie de l'objet qui pour eux était le symbole de cette période de temps qu'ils traversaient et un court texte, un court témoignage écrit de quelques lignes seulement expliquant à la fois les raisons du don et l'importance de l'objet pour eux. J'insiste sur ce point parce que vous allez voir comment finalement, au-delà de l'objet, le parcours de vie derrière l'objet est pour nous très signifiant et très important. Nous avions décidé de lancer cette collecte simplement, j'allais dire, sur une période de temps donnée. On aurait pu continuer. On continue un peu de manière informelle. On avait décidé que la collecte s'arrêterait, on arrêterait d'étudier et de relancer les propositions à la fin du mois de mai. À la fin de cette période-là, nous avions reçu 540 propositions de dons. Donc, c'était le chiffre officiel. Et puis, petit à petit, nous avons continué à recevoir des propositions, à les examiner. Nous n'avons jamais dit non lorsque ces positions étaient arrivées après la fin du mois de mai, ce qui explique le chiffre que je vous ai noté ici sur cette diapositive de 642 propositions, qui est le chiffre aujourd'hui, qui sera peut-être supérieur demain, mais que nous continuons à regarder même après l'issue de cette collecte. Alors, qu'ont été les produits de cette collecte? Alors, effectivement, les masques, on s'y attendait. Moi, c'est une collecte qui a été très relancée, très relayée par la presse et par les médias en France. Et on me demandait au début du lancement de cette collecte, à quoi vous attendez-vous? Je répondais, je ne m'attends pas à grand-chose. J'étais complètement dans l'hésitation sur d'abord, est-ce que les gens allaient répondre et ensuite, est-ce qu'ils, désolée, elle revient, et surtout, est-ce qu'ils allaient être très variés dans leurs propositions? Je m'attendais beaucoup aux masques, je m'attendais aux attestations de sortie, je m'attendais à des choses autour de l'école à la maison, qui était un gros sujet. Et on a eu ça, mais on a eu énormément d'autres choses, comme vous allez le voir. Alors, les masques, et je vais revenir sur ce que certains de mes collègues ont déjà dit, les masques reçus en nombre, une quarantaine, je crois 42 propositions de masques parmi les 640 dont je vous ai parlé, donc pas une majorité, mais très présents en série parce que les gens fabriquaient des masques en soutien pour envoyer dans les hôpitaux, pour envoyer au personnel soignant. Je reviens sur un exemple comparable à celui dont Johanna parlait tout à l'heure, les masques en origami, le do it yourself, avec comme ça des créations avec ce qu'on a sous la main. Ce qu'on a sous la main, comme par exemple, comme vous voyez sur la photographie de la dame en bas, un filtre à café, ou tout objet pouvant servir de masque. Des masques faits pour dédramatiser les situations, avec ces petits masques d'enfants qui sont partie prenante de déguisements complets de militaires, de cow-boys. Donc, on intègre le masque pour le dédramatiser à une sorte de panoplie. Des masques aussi beaucoup qui font l'objet d'une recherche esthétique particulière. Vous voyez avec cet exemple du masque assorti aux gants et aux jeans que cette dame donc, a confectionné et a accepté de nous donner. Des masques porteurs de messages aussi. Là, ça rencontre ensuite d'autres choses dont Johanna a parlé. C'est d'ailleurs assez intéressant de voir qu'il y a des congruences comme ça qui se font au-delà des frontières territoriales, avec cette dame qui a écrit sur son masque, enfin brodé les différents mots qui pour elle étaient importants, confinement, santé, Covid, nature, vivre, etc. Des masques plus ludiques, parfois humoristiques, avec le masque de beauté, par exemple avec les tranches de concombre reproduites sur ce masque, le masque lumineux, les masques de la débrouille, ces masques qu'on fabrique ou ces visières avec des couvertures plastiques fixées sur des lunettes ou des objets recyclés comme un bonnet de soutien-gorge et parfois qualifiés de masques de la honte de manière assez amusante par les gens qui nous les offrent parce qu'ils ont un peu honte de ce qu'ils ont produit comme ils pouvaient avec ce qu'ils avaient sous la main. Et d'autres pièces, parfois faites dans le commerce par des maisons qui recyclaient leur chaîne de production à un temps donné. Le masque bleu que vous avez sur la partie basse de l'écran est un masque qui avait été produit par la maison Pain de Sucre, qui est une maison qui fait des maillots de bain et qui, à un moment donné, a arrêté sa chaîne de production de maillots de bain et a utilisé les tissus qui habituellement servaient à la confection des maillots pour fabriquer des masques à proposer dans le commerce. Les accessoires de masques sont aussi venus c'est vrai, quand je dis accessoires, c'est ce qui accompagne le masque, ce qui est autour du masque, la machine qui a servi à fabriquer les masques, les petits fils métalliques qui ont permis de ne pas être trop embués, de ne pas trop embuer les lunettes, par exemple, avec ce système de pince-nez. Et puis des choses peut-être moins attendues, comme une maison de maroquinerie qui a très vite mis sur le marché des étuis pour ranger son masque, donc ce très joli petit objet assez luxueux, ou un ingénieur qui, chez lui, a fabriqué sa machine à désinfecter les masques avec un système de lampes UV bricolé, mais quand même assez prouvant un niveau de technicité assez important. Donc, vous le voyez, des masques dans cette collecte, mais comme je vous le disais, pas seulement. Et donc, très rapidement, je voulais vous montrer quelques autres typologies d'objets. Alors, je vous en parlais tout à l'heure, les attestations de sortie dérogatoire, les objets qui servent à ouvrir une porte sans la toucher, comme ce crochet de meuble Ikea qui restait dans le sac de son propriétaire et qui lui permettait d'ouvrir et de fermer des portes sans avoir à poser la main sur la poignée partagée par tous. Les objets de manifestation de soutien au monde soignant, aux professions devenues essentielles, selon le terme adopté. Donc, vous voyez ces panneaux merci aux soignants, aux médecins, aux infirmières. On en a d'autres pour les éboueurs, pour les caissières. Des objets pour faire du bruit au moment des applaudissements de 20 heures aux fenêtres, comme ce petit outil de jardinage auquel on a accroché des grelots. Des objets pour passer le temps ou marquer le temps qui passe. Donc, on bricole des jeux de backgammon avec une planche à découper et des bouchons de bouteilles. Des objets bricolés, des tyroliennes pour relier deux fenêtres d'immeubles sans face pour se passer le journal, le pain, le sel. Ou ce col, on parlait tout à l'heure des vêtements, des tops, des zoom tops. On en a un ici avec ce col qui était porté pour les conférences en visio par sa propriétaire. Alors, quel premier bilan pouvons-nous tirer de cette collecte et finalement, quels enseignements et quels questionnements? Je voulais, moi, vous faire part des questions qui sont encore les nôtres aujourd'hui. Alors, je surveille l'heure. Aujourd'hui, d'abord, voilà, quel est finalement le vrai produit de la collecte? Vous l'aurez compris, on a eu 642 propositions. On a 642 propositions à cette date. Il était clair dès le départ que nous ne ferions pas entrer dans les collections la totalité des propositions et nous conservions le droit de faire un choix parmi les propositions qui nous étaient faites. J'allais dire que la totalité des 642 propositions constitue déjà l'archive de cette collecte, c'est-à-dire que nous la conservons comme telle. À la fois, comme vous voyez ce tableau ici, les photographies et les témoignages qui les accompagnent et qui vont nous permettre de poursuivre notre étude. Sur ce qui est venu au musée, nous avons en fait à ce jour fait venir à peu près 200 objets physiquement que nous avons choisis selon des critères, j'allais dire, très pragmatiques de représentativité des différentes catégories d'objets qui étaient proposés, de variété, de possibilités de conservation à long et à moyen terme, parce que beaucoup de ces objets n'étaient pas conservables. Ce sont des choses périssables parfois très fragiles. Je vous en montrerai un exemple un peu plus loin. Et puis, ce que moi, j'appelle le plus de l'objet ou la force de l'objet, c'est-à-dire ce qui est vraiment très subjectif, j'en conviens, mais ce que l'objet apporte de plus par rapport simplement à sa photographie. Et sur ces 200 objets, on se réserve encore le droit, après une phase d'études supplémentaires, on se réserve encore le droit de faire une phase d'études et de revenir vers les donateurs en leur disant finalement nous garderons ou nous ne conserverons pas votre objet. Alors, quelques questions qui sont encore soulevées aujourd'hui. et des problèmes finalement de méthode que nous avons rencontrés, ça a d'abord été de ne pas se marcher sur les pieds avec nos collègues qui pouvaient lancer des collectes comparables. Nous avons travaillé par exemple avec le Musée national de l'éducation et nous avons réfléchi vers eux des propositions relatives à l'école à la maison qui étaient leur sujet d'intérêt pour ne pas faire doublon dans les collections publiques. Nous avons aussi choisi, nous sommes beaucoup interrogés sur la méthode de venue, de transport des objets vers nos réserves, en proposant aux donateurs de nous envoyer directement les choses, ce qui a provoqué parfois certains problèmes en termes de conservation. Je vous montre les petits œufs qui étaient piqués, des œufs de Pâques piqués de clous de girofle qui étaient censés protéger contre le Covid et qui sont arrivés finalement dans un état assez lamentable. Et puis, un vrai problème qui est un problème de droit auquel nous sommes confrontés, de problèmes de droit, de reproduction que nous n'avons pas complètement toujours réglés encore. Alors, une question qui s'est posée aussi assez rapidement, et j'en finirai avec cela, c'est finalement le biais très net sociologique qui est apparu, puisque les personnes qui ont répondu à la collecte sont, j'allais dire, le public classique du musée, et on n'a pas touché les classes les plus populaires de la société auxquelles on s'intéressait aussi. Donc, ce biais-là, on essaye de le corriger avec un chercheur postdoctorant qui fait partie de l'équipe depuis 1 an et qui est encore là pour 1 année, et qui est allé enquêter auprès d'associations. Ici, je cite l'exemple d'un McDonald's de Marseille qui a été réquisitionné pour créer une plateforme d'aide alimentaire de manière à donner un contrepoint à une collecte qui montrait un biais sociologique finalement assez important. Alors, la grande question qui nous reste à traiter aujourd'hui, c'est le retour que nous devons faire à ces donateurs, comment leur rendre la lisibilité qu'ils méritent, alors par des publications sur le site web, vous en avez un exemple aussi, et puis aussi par des petits gestes assez individuels. Je voulais citer cet exemple d'un monsieur qui nous a envoyé un petit bonhomme à qui il a fait vivre des tas d'aventures pendant le confinement, et il m'a demandé de lui faire une série de photos quand le bonhomme était arrivé à Marseille, et donc là, vous le voyez dans mon bureau, comme un petit clin d'œil retour à ce donateur. Et j'en termine là, et encore désolée pour l'interruption et l'irruption de mes enfants dans cette séance.
Okay, hello everyone. I'm Dr. Alexandra Palmer, and I'm here with my colleagues from the Royal Ontario Museum. We're speaking from Toronto. In the spring of 2020, during lockdown, 3 curators at the Royal Ontario Museum, also called ROM, banded together. Dr. Famida Suleiman, the curator of Islamic world art, and Dr. Sarah Fee and myself, both in global fashions and textiles, Sarah responsible for Asia and Africa, and myself for Western Europe and North America. But before I'd start, I'd like to just acknowledge that we are talking from Toronto, and that the museum, the Royal Ontario Museum, sits on the ancestral lands of the Wendat, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and the Anishinaabe Nation, including the Mississaugas of the First Credit Nation, and this land has been there since time immemorial to today. Next slide, please. So we'll offer a brief overview of the mask that brought us together and have kept us together for over 1.5 years, and we're still at it, working from home and apart, and occasionally within the museum. We collected together over 300 masks from around the world from 20 countries, documenting the stories of making, makers, and the cultural meaning, and we each collected in our areas. So we, now the 3 Masketeers, opened a physical exhibition in September in the museum, which was led by Famida, and soon this icon virtual mask exhibition with collaboration from colleagues around the world that records singular moments both locally and globally of this COVID pandemic. I'd also like to thank our photographer at this point and all the ROM staff who came together for us to make all this work. So everybody's life in COVID is peculiar and particular. And I'd like to just give you a bit of a timeline from Toronto, as we've lived with COVID. And also we tend to forget the details as things have become so-called normalized. So in March 2020, we went into lockdown. On the 5th, Canada reported its first case of human-to-human COVID transmission and its first death on the 9th. On the 11th of March, WHO declared COVID a pandemic, and we had to learn what that meant. And on the 14th, the museum closed its doors, the first time for more than 2 days in its history. On the 16th, Dr. Theresa Tam, who's our head of medicine in Canada, and Ontario declared a state of emergency. Next slide, please. And people reacted. In Nova Scotia, Sherry Kearney has a company called Maritime Tartan that she founded in 2019 and sells tartan-related goods for the tourist industry. And of course, this wasn't going to be doing so well. And she decided not to take CERB, which was the Canada Emergency Relief Benefit Plan, and on April 6th launched her mask on National Tartan Day. And she, with her husband, made masks. And they adopted this make, buy, and give back, the model that many people have around the world, claiming agency in the face of the unknown. So by April, Kearney's $8 masks, the pleated ones you see on the side, had raised over $25,000 for local charities. But the supply chain was broken and everyone had difficulty finding basics. And in fact, her elastic supplier considered her an essential service. So she got all the elastic she needed. And then a terrible thing happened in April 18th to 19th in 2020. Nova Scotia had a terrible shooting, a devastating effect in Canada, of a 13-hour rampage by a gunman who killed 22 and set fire to 16 locations in Nova Scotia. And this wearing of Nova Scotia tartan and her mask became very, very symbolic. This is the Nova Scotian tartan, the provincial tartan. And Sherry donated masks and, of course, started raising money from the sales of her mask to support the victims in this phase of solidarity. In November 2020, she had to change her mask, as the one on the right shows, to update the pattern for 3 layers, which was then suggested. Next slide, please. In May 2020, people started getting serious, and of course, Instagram was fantastic. And the public, on 20th of May, the public health experts recommended that Canadians actually wear masks in public. And the father here, Johnny, just started Johnny Mask. He's getting very worried, and he was worried about his daughter and wanted to protect her. So he made this Superman and Supergirl masks and posted them on Instagram, and then ended up having a business just before Father's Day. Next slide, please. So people were really reacting. And then Black Lives Matter happened. It was, everything was happening thick and fast, and we were reeling. Of course, the murder of George Floyd created protests around the world in 2,000 cities. And we collected this Life is Black mask. The sales that went to the Bail Project to help release people who've been prosecuted. In Toronto, Nadia Lloyd, a local maker, out of work, also doing not making masks before, had a conversation with her son about racism, and together they decided to do something, and they actually came up with this design for a mask that has the CN Tower, which is a symbol of Toronto, which they see from their apartment, with the fist of solidarity on it, and they had these printed, and there's the Toronto skyline there. And the Toronto Raptors coach, Nick Nurse, bought them for his team, and then they were shown on, they wore them when they had a conference on national television. And the Toronto Raptors are known for being one of the most active sports team in terms of activism, and certainly Black Lives Matter, and they wore them. And her Instagram account completely exploded. And by that summer, she had raised over $7,000 for Black Lives Matter Toronto. Next slide, please. But one size does not fit all. And while we think masks, you know, a mask is a mask, they're very, very different. And the people were being left out. So Alexa Jovanovic for Ailey Design, who has a new company that she founded just as COVID was unfolding, is for people with sight impaired or blind people. And she covers all her things with Swarovski crystals that are decorated in Braille. So they actually say things so that people who are sight impaired can actually find their clothes and know what it is they're grabbing, because it says things like, this is an oversized jeans jacket. But in this case, she worked with them to have these uplifting phrases, and this one says chin up, mask on. Other people, such as Izzy Camilleri of Is Adapted, made a lip reading mask, monies which 20% of sales going to the Canadian Hearing Services. And this is a mask for you to wear so that people who are hearing impaired can read your lips. Other designers such as Diana Coatsworth made a singing mask. This was a pattern that was going around where the mask is actually boned and protects people so people could sing together in choirs. And she was actually a very instrumental person in setting up the Sewing Army, which was a Canadian group she established in March that was selling, giving away masks for PPE to essential workers, and in fact made over 100,000 that were donated through this wonderful organization. And then finally, Helene Clarkson of Toronto, who had her company works, designs things for travel clothing, wasn't doing too well. And when Toronto in June went into stage 2, allowing patios to reopen and people to go outside and gather, she made this happy hour mask with a washable stainless steel straw and the little flap to do it, to encourage people to go out to support local businesses. And it actually brought back one of her workers, and she sold out, selling over 1,000 in 1 month. So people were really doing well. And now I'd like to let you talk to Sarah to see what she collected. Thanks.
Hello, everyone. So as Alexandra mentioned, each of us at the ROM had our own collecting ideas and directions. So since I'm responsible for the ROM's collections of textiles from Africa and Asia, I set myself to find handcrafted face masks from many points in Asia and Africa. And I also wanted to support textile artisans, either by buying directly from them or through umbrella craft organizations. As early as April 2020, I was hearing how tourism was grinding to a halt, and that was greatly impacting many textile artisans who have come to depend on the tourist market. And as one group in West Bengal said, we have no money saved, we have nothing in our hands, what do we do? But of course, artisans pivoted quickly as other makers. And at first they were using existing stock to make face masks. And it was actually hard to purchase them because they sold out quickly. They were made in small batches. And many of these makers used informal means like Facebook and Instagram to get their products out. So I got these first masks, which you see on the left, from Mixtex weavers in Oaxaca, Mexico, and on the right, from the famous tent makers of Cairo, using informal networks and Facebook. And as you can see, although they were, in some instances quickly made, the masks all the same reflect and assert local identity and pride with their iconic motifs, the colors, the techniques. But as time went on, these makers were able to refine their works and materials. So as you can see here now with this new mask in the lower right, by the fall of 2020, the Cairo tent makers were offering new designs. Here you can see one with a long strap, which they devised in response to consumer demand to make masks that women could wear over their head coverings with these large straps. Next slide, please. So where possible, we tried to complement existing collections at the ROM, and we have a wonderful historic collection of hand-woven garments from the Philippines. And I want to thank Dr. Annabel Salvador Amoris of the Cordillera Museum in Baguio, the Philippines, who helped us to assemble a collection from the southern Philippines, which is actually hard to reach. And the masks she helped us to collect represent a wide range of communities and techniques, including banana thread ikat, embroidery, and tapestry, which you can see here. And Dr. Salvador Amoris is a partner in this current ICOM online virtual exhibition, Clothing the Pandemic. So you can find examples and more descriptions on the website when it launches. And I wish to point out the mask in the top row in the center. And this actually comes to us through a colleague here in Toronto, Lynn Milgram, who connected us to Ppe Tesoro, who is the designer of the mask. And she is one of the Philippines' best-known fashion designers. And this particular example we have has a base actually of pineapple fiber, piña, done in open work with traditional embroidery forms on it. And Ppe Tesoro was inspired not only to create beautiful masks to inspire hope, but also to keep her artisans employed. Next slide, please. I want to extend a very big thanks to Mala Sinha of the Bodhi Textile Printing Studio in Gujarat, India. Mala is a very high energy woman, and during lockdown in the summer of 2020, she was very restless. And so she kindly assembled a collection of over 80 masks for the ROM and shipped them to us. She reached out to her own networks, colleagues, friends, and craft organizations. And what we got was this collection. There's just a small sample here of all these varieties of the amazing textile arts across India, the painted, the printed, embroidered, beaded. And of course, you may be curious about the one on the right, and that is one of our more intriguing masks from India. It's actually made of paper mache, and it comes from West Bengal. And this type of mask is traditionally used for ceremonial annual dances known as chow dances that combine martial arts, tribal, and folk traditions. And to keep their April 2020 dance event going, mask makers added cotton inserts to keep the dancers safe. Next slide, please. Just quickly, another early COVID moment was DIY mask making, and we have this example from Atsushi Futatsuya, the founder of Upcycle Stitches based in New York. Now, at the beginning of COVID, he got a lot of demands for people who wanted to buy his masks, but he said he didn't have time to make them. So what he put together were these kits that people could buy and make at home. And he did this not only to save himself time, but he also wanted to share the therapeutic aspects of needlework. So through these kits, people could stay at home, they could keep themselves occupied, they could meditate through needlework, learn new skills, and learn about sustainability. Next slide, please. And coming closer to home are these specialized masks and accessories that were made in Ontario, Canada. As Alexandra mentioned, in the end, no one mask can fit all. And the Sikh community found special challenges in wearing masks on top of turbans and beards. So Sanjeet Kaur of the fashion label Accor brand in Brampton, Ontario, stepped up to the challenge. She designed a mask, as you see here, that has wide and extended straps that secure with snaps. Now, she was inspired to make this mask in part by her husband, who's a policeman and was on the front line every day, and he needed a mask that could stay firmly in place and could be washed. And her group also designed this new turban pattern, which you see here, called Intense, whose bright and bold colors were meant to battle the horrors of COVID with beauty and bravery. And next slide, please. And then finally, you can see the mask on the left. This actually came as a donation to the ROM from the Chinese Canadian National Council for Social Justice. And this group received funding from the Department of Canadian Heritage to combat anti-Asian racism through their project, which documented racist incidents, developed education tools, and it ran a social media campaign. It asked prominent Canadians to wear the mask that you see on the left for a social media campaign, and they included Toronto's own mayor. And through this, they publicized this Stop the Spread of Racism campaign. So thank you very much, and I will turn it over now to Famida.
Hi, everyone. Hope you can hear me. I have 5 minutes before the translators leave, so I'm going to zoom through this. Just another example of an anti-Asian racism mask by an artist, Don Kwan. It's not a protective device. It really is a work of art, but inspired by COVID masks. He did a whole series of them. In this case, he used a takeout bag to make the mask, but he also made many from Chinese takeout menus. And really, he was responding to the anti-Asian racism that was pretty much a global situation. And he found a way of channeling his sadness and concern and creativity by making these masks, because clearly everybody was ordering Chinese food through Uber Eats and so on. But yet there was a lot of insensitivity towards the community. Very quickly, our exhibition, an absolute labor of love. The three of us were collecting masks from about April 2020, but that's exactly when 500 staff members of the ROM were furloughed, laid off. And so when they returned in September 2020, oh my God, there was so much work to be done. And when we finally got the green light for the exhibition, we had 6 months to put it together. Like including registration, organizing payments, because we kept buying the masks. We used our personal funds, we fundraised. We had to do photography, choose the masks, design, mount them, write the labels, have media interviews. So that's how Unmasking the Pandemic happened. We divided our masks into 4 themes: heroes and warriors, poetry and protest, survival and strength, and artistry and innovation. And these themes then really helped us when we took on as project leads with Corinne on the Clothing the Pandemic ICOM exhibition. So there will, that exhibition will have 6 themes. We sort of broadened it out, art and intervention, politics and protest, solidarity and communities, body and spirit, innovation and sustainability, and fashion and pop culture. So that's going to be a really exciting show. We managed to put 100 of our masks on display, and we mixed them, obviously, not geographically, but thematically. We were able to talk about sustainable design, like the banana fiber one at the top, next to a French-Canadian designer, Tanya Thierberge, who really looks at recycling in her designs. We've shown you the Sanjeet Kaur turban mask below, but also next to Catherine Adai's West African Ghanaian mask and head wrap, and the Métis artist from Vancouver, BC, Lisa Shepherd. The mask on the right, the blue and pink one, is made of paper, and by 2 designers, artists in Toronto who are from Iranian heritage. And it has a compostable coffee filter insert on the inside. And really, it just speaks of our common humanity. There's a poem from a 12th century poet, which really when it's there on the slide, it really talks about that we should really work as one during times of crises. Here's just a nice example of all the masks. Our biggest concerns was really, when the exhibition opens, which it did in September, will people still be wearing masks? Some people were worried that the pandemic would be over. Some people thought, would people even bother coming to see a mask show when everyone hates wearing them? The good news is we've had some pretty good uptake, even though the museum is still closed 2 days a week. We average between 700 and 800 visitors per week in the mask exhibition. It's totally free of charge. You just walk in. You don't even have to book a slot to come in like some of our other shows. So we've had, we've had about 11,000 people come and see the show in the last 15 weeks, and it's still on until March. I'm supposed to just very briefly say, well, what's the future of exhibitions? We've tried a few different things. For example, for the mask show, we did an Instagram live virtual tour. There's Alex and myself. And we had 423 people, join us for that, which was, we thought, quite miraculous. So clearly social media is going to be something that people have to take very seriously going forward. We have another exhibition, again, free of charge, right next door to the mask one, called My Pandemic Story. Youth create portraits of a pandemic, with really beautiful and compelling artworks made by children and youth. And so we've adapted the pressing the button using your foot method, which then allows you to look at a lot of audiovisual material so that nobody touches buttons. And the last one that I wanted to tell you about is, this is Sarah's, she was the lead on this exhibition called The Cloth That Changed the World, India's Painted and Printed Cottons. They had installed it and then they had to close the museum, and everyone was really sad because this is a ROM original exhibition with so much intense research behind it and very hard to mount with all of these textiles. And then, it reopened when the museum reopened again. But what we decided to do is, if you look on the bottom left, this is, it's a 3D virtual walkthrough, which requires special camera and video. So hopefully in January, we will be able to launch this 3D virtual walkthrough for people who just can't make it to the exhibition. And they'll be able to walk through it. They'll be able to go around the objects. They'll have the label text there. So here's another example of the future of our exhibitions. We're ending on a hopeful note. As you can see, we did collect a lot of masks that had hopeful messages. And yes, that's it. We would like to say a special thanks to everybody here who not only helped with the ICOM online exhibition that we will launch very soon, but also the people who were involved in the ROMS exhibition.